There is a piece of paper in the State Archives of Venice. It is handwritten, faded, and nearly 500 years old. It records a transaction dated October 3, 1526. A gunsmith named Bartolomeo Beretta delivered 185 arquebus barrels to the arsenal of the Republic of Venice and received 296 ducats in payment. That piece of paper is the oldest known business record of the oldest manufacturing company in the world. When that invoice was written, Michelangelo was still painting the Sistine Chapel. Shakespeare would not be born for another 38 years. The Ottoman Empire was at the height of its power. The Americas had been reached by European ships for barely 3 decades, and a family in a small valley in northern Italy was already making gun barrels. They are still making them today, 15 generations later. In the same valley, under the same name, Gardone Val Trompia sits in the foothills of the Italian Alps in the Lombardy region, about 15 miles north of Brescia. The valley is narrow, the river runs cold. The hills above it are dense with iron ore deposits that made the region famous for metalworking throughout the Middle Ages. Blacksmiths had been working iron in the Val Trompia for generations before Bartolomeo Beretta received that first payment from Venice. The geography was the foundation, the iron was local, the water from the river powered the hammers. The skills were inherited, father to son, across decades before anyone thought to write any of it down. When Bartolomeo delivered those 185 barrels, he was not starting a company. He was formalizing a tradition that had been building for longer than the records show. What he created, without knowing it, without intending it, was the institutional structure that would carry that tradition through 5 centuries of wars, plagues, political upheaval, industrial revolution, and the complete transformation of the weapons industry from hand-forged iron barrels to computer-controlled precision manufacturing. The Beretta family did not plan to survive 500 years. They simply refused to stop. The valley that nurtured them also tried to destroy them. Through the 17th and 18th centuries, the iron-working clans of the Val Trompia were locked in a cycle of rivalry and violence that claimed lives across generations. Competing families fought over contracts, over territory, over the iron deposits in the hills above the river. Assassinations were common enough that historians studying the period described the valley's feuding as one of the defining features of the era. The Beretta family navigated it. They were present enough to maintain their position and careful enough to avoid the conflicts that eliminated their competitors. Surviving the valley's internal wars was the first test. The external wars that followed were the next. Every major European conflict, from the Italian wars of the 16th century through the Napoleonic campaigns of the early 19th century, produced demand for weapons and disrupted the supply chains, the trade routes, and the political structures that arms manufacturers depended on. Beretta armed the forces of Venice, then the forces of Spanish-controlled Italy, then whoever needed barrels in sufficient quantity to keep the furnaces burning. The family understood something that took most manufacturers centuries to learn. The contract matters less than the capability. Kings change, empires fall, borders move. The ability to produce a quality firearm at a competitive price is the only asset that survives every political transition. Beretta protected that asset above everything else. The 19th century forced a transformation that smaller workshops did not survive. Industrial manufacturing was replacing the individual craftsman. A gunsmith who could produce 100 barrels a year by hand could not compete with a factory producing thousands by machine. Beretta made the transition. The family invested in the machinery of industrial production while preserving the quality standards of artisan manufacture. It was a difficult balance. The temptation in industrial production is always to sacrifice precision for volume. Beretta refused the trade-off and built a reputation that civilian markets rewarded in the slow periods between military contracts. When wars ended and military procurement dried up, it was the sporting shooter, the hunter, the collector who kept the factory running. The civilian market was not a consolation prize. It was the stabilizer that allowed the company to survive every military contraction without collapsing. The strategy was not written in any document. It emerged from necessity and became instinct across generations of family management. The 20th century brought the greatest tests. The First World War generated enormous demand. The Second World War brought the German occupation of northern Italy and the complex, dangerous navigation of producing weapons under a regime that Beretta had not chosen to serve. The Val Trompia was a contested theater. The factory survived. The family survived. When the war ended and Italy began rebuilding its shattered economy, Beretta did something that revealed how deeply the family understood their own precariousness. They diversified. Not into unrelated industries, the Beretta experiments with automobiles and calculating machines in the post-war years went nowhere and were quietly abandoned, but within firearms they expanded new designs, new calibers, new markets. The Beretta 92 project began in the early 1970s as a response to changing military and law enforcement requirements. The Italian Comsubin Special Forces unit adopted it first, then Italian law enforcement, then other European agencies. The pistol was reliable, accurate, and refined over successive iterations. By 1975, the Model 92 was a serious military sidearm. By 1984, it was about to become the most consequential pistol contract in a generation. The United States military had carried the Colt M1911 as its standard sidearm since 1911. 74 years, 2 world wars, Korea, Vietnam. The M1911 in 45 ACP was not merely a sidearm to the American military. It was an institution, a symbol, a piece of national identity as recognizable as the uniform itself. Replacing it was politically toxic before the procurement process even opened. When the Army finally issued the XM9 trials to find a successor, the submissions came from every serious pistol manufacturer in the Western world. Beretta submitted the 92F. Sig Sauer submitted the P226. The technical performance of both pistols was exceptional. In the final assessment, the P226 and the 92F were effectively equal on reliability and performance metrics. The contract came down to price. Beretta submitted a lower bid for magazines and spare parts that brought their total package below Sig Sauer's offer. On January 14, 1985, the Beretta 92F was formally adopted as the M9. An Italian pistol, manufactured by a family company in a northern Italian valley, had replaced the Colt M1911 as the standard sidearm of the United States Armed Forces. The political reaction was immediate and fierce. Congress held hearings. American manufacturers challenged the contract. Critics argued that the military was abandoning a proven American weapon for a foreign alternative that had never been tested in sustained American combat operations. Beretta had won the contract. Winning the acceptance was a separate problem entirely. The M9 served the American military for 32 years. In that time it went through Gulf War deployments, the campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq, and every operational environment the American military entered from 1985 to 2017. It was not a flawless record. Slide failures in the late 1980s, caused primarily by non-standard overpressure ammunition rather than defects in the pistol's design, generated negative press that took years to overcome. The Navy SEALs abandoned the M9 in favor of the Sig Sauer P226 after those incidents and never returned. The Army Special Forces community retained their M1911s for years out of preference for the heavier .45 caliber round. The M9 was never universally beloved within the force it served, but it functioned reliably under conditions that the original critics had predicted would break it. 32 years in the holsters of American soldiers is a record that requires no apology. When the Army finally replaced it in 2017, selecting the Sig Sauer P3-ton 20 through the modular handgun system competition, Beretta had submitted the M9A3 as a modernized alternative. It was eliminated in the down-select round. The 30-year hold on the American military sidearm market ended at a gun show in Las Vegas when Sig Sauer's booth set out champagne glasses before the announcement was officially public. Today, Beretta is celebrating the anniversary that no other manufacturer in history has reached, 500 years. In 2026, the company is unveiling 10 unique firearms, 7 limited edition models, and a year of events marking 5 centuries of continuous family ownership and continuous production in the same valley where Bartolomeo Beretta delivered 185 barrels to Venice and received his 296 ducats. The 16th generation of the family is running the company. The headquarters are still in Gardone Valtrompia. The Beretta Holding Group now encompasses over 50 subsidiaries and 20 brands, including Benelli, Ticca, Sacco, Franchi, and most recently Hausken suppressors acquired in early 2025. The civilian market that saved the company in every military downturn now accounts for a substantial portion of revenues across 90 countries. The balance between military and civilian that the family learned from necessity centuries ago is now the deliberate architecture of a global enterprise. No private equity firm has loaded Beretta with debt to extract short-term value. No conglomerate has absorbed it and rationalized away the engineering heritage that justifies the price premium. The company that made barrels for the Venetian Republic still makes firearms for the Italian military, for NATO allies, for law enforcement agencies, for hunters and competitive shooters on every continent. The same family, the same valley, the the same iron in the hills above the river. 5 centuries is not luck. It is not geography alone. It is not even the quality of the product, though the quality has never been in question. It is the institutional refusal of 16 generations of one family to accept that the story was over. Every war that should have destroyed them became a contract. Every peacetime drought that should have closed the factory became a pivot to civilian markets. Every competitor that should have displaced them became a benchmark to exceed. The invoice from 1526 is in an archive in Venice. The factory it created is still running in the valley above Brescia, and the family that signed that first transaction is still signing the ones that follow.